Unit 26 Reliability, Validity and Triangulation. Contents 26.1 Introduction, 26.2 Concepts of Reliability and Validity, 26.3 Three Types of Reliability, 26.4 Working Towards Reliability, 26.5 Procedural Validity, 26.6 Field Research as a Validity Check, 26.7 Method Appropriate Criteria, 26.8 Triangulation, 26.9 Ethical Considerations in Qualitative Research, 26.10 Conclusion. Learning Objectives. It is expected that after reading Unit 26, you would be able to ensure that data you have collected are reliable in terms of their consistency, precision, and repeatability. While being reliable, data collected are at the same time valid in the sense of giving a true description, measurement of social reality. Application of triangulation technique, methodological pluralism, multiple methods has enabled you to make an accurate measurement or descriptions of the social reality. As a researcher, you keep in mind ethical consideration to protect the subject of your research from physical or psychological harm, breach of privacy and confidentiality of the subject, and acquire the informed consent of the subject for carrying out field research. 26.6. In this chapter, we are concerned with the issues of reliability, validity and triangulation. In other words, we studied the criteria for evaluating qualitative research that has been conducted by an investigator. We will examine various techniques that enable the researchers and the reader to evaluate the extent to which the data gathered and analyzed represent the ground reality. We will also introduce you to certain method-specific criteria for evaluating the qualitative research that have gained popularity in recent years. We will discuss the technique of triangulation to further ensure accuracy of the data collected, and then conclude by examining some key ethical issues that need to be kept in mind while embracing upon a qualitative study. Basically, moral and ethical questions come up at all stages of research, from selecting the topic area of study, source of funding, to publication of research findings. 26.2 Concepts of Reliability and Validity. The aim of qualitative research is to bring to light facts about the phenomena. In that sense, it is objective according to Kirk and Miller. It is our view that qualitative research can be performed as a social science. Understanding the working of a scientific behavior, whether it is of natural or social variety, entails an appreciation of its objectivity. But this convention, the objectivity of a piece of qualitative research, is evaluated in terms of reliability and validity of its observations. By reliability is mean the extent to which a measurement procedure yields the same answer however and whenever it is carried out. Validity is the extent to which it gives the correct answer. Kirk and Miller give an example from the physical world. Suppose a thermometer shows the reading of 82 degrees every time Celsius every time it is plunged in boiling water. It is obviously a reliable thermometer, but the thermometer that gives different reading near about 100 degrees Celsius each time is placed in boiling water may not be reliable, but it is certainly quite valid. In other words, validity refers to the truth value of a finding. For a piece of research to be judged as objective, it has to be both reliable and valid. Let us fully grasp one and by one each of the two concepts. Reliability. You can clearly state that reliability is about consistency. Your research would be reliable if, when repeated using the same method, it brings the same result. Sociologists need to establish the usefulness of data they gather to ensure the answers of the following questions. How accurate a profile of social life one is able to get? Whether the conclusions reached are representative enough to be applicable to everyone? Is it possible to repeat the research if others want to carry out? And will there be a similar result if they did? We can ensure the above kind of usefulness by using the two concepts of reliability and validity. Reliability of the data is of our main concern, because if you do not have reliable data, the conclusions reached on this basis will be quite useless. Box 26.1. What is the data reliable concerned with? What is the data reliability concerned with? The following ideas figure in making data reliable. Consistency. It is important to obtain consistent similar responses to the same questions in similar circumstances. Precision. One has to know how systematic is the form of data that is based on asking people questions about things that they know little about. Reliability. If others wants to carry out the same research as you have completed, would they get the similar result? If the answer is yes, then your research has repeatability of the data collection method. As per the formulation of Kirk and Miller, there are three types of reliability. Basing on Kirk and Miller, we will discuss each type in the following section. 26.3. Three types of reliability. Kirk and Miller discuss three kinds of reliability. Understanding the difference between them will help you to figure out whether the data you have gathered in your qualitative study is reliable. Quixotic reliability. This refers to the circumstances in which the single method of observation yields the same measurement over and over again. In an ethnographic study, this kind of reliability of data indicates that the investigator has managed to elicit rehearsed or politically correct information. For example, a study is conducted on gender discrimination and the subjects are asked to question, do you believe in the equality of men and women? Unfailingly, the answer obtained is yes. However, the reality observed around us is actually quite different. We may then conclude that the finding has only quixotic reliability because people are giving the answers they think is correct because they do not wish to offend anyone. So it is probably a good idea to ask different kind of questions like, do you think that women professionals are as competent as their male colleagues? Perhaps the answers to this question will be more varied and reflect reality better. Diachronic reliability. This refers to the stability of an observation over time. Some examples include the test reset paradigm of experimental psychology and survey research, in which surveys are conducted afresh after a gap of time to see if the results are same. However, in the context of sociocultural phenomena in which the rate of change is rapid, obtaining similar results over a period of time is unlikely. Continuing the example of gender discrimination, it is seen that in the past few years, women's participation in the workforce has changed. They are no longer ignored for the selection of certain kind of jobs, and in fact are given preference over males in areas of telemarketing and the hospitality services industry. Synchronic reliability. This refers to the similarity of observation within the same period, which can be evaluated comparisons of the same data by different methods. Unlike quixotic reliability, synchronic reliability involves observations that are consistent in nature. However, Kirk and Miller sensitize us to a very interesting paradox. Synchronic reliability is often more useful if it is absent. In other words, if different methods or approaches to a problem throw up different results, it may alter the qualitative research to a certain aspects of problem that he had not considered before. 26.4. Working towards reliability. How can a qualitative researcher go about increasing the reliability of his data and their interpretations? A key factor is the quality of recording and documenting data. The field notes taken by the researcher must be documented in such a way that they can be compared and shared with other field workers and colleagues. Berman recommends extensive, explicit, and perspective fields notes, self-analytical reporting of research procedures and research context, documentation of sources, documentation of the basis of inference, and documentations of ethnographers' theories of society and his biases. To make your field notes accessible to others, certain guidelines must be followed that enable others to separate the concept of the observed from those of the observers. Flick has adapted a format for conventionalizations of field notes, which is given in the table below. Table 26.1, the format for conventionalizations of field notes. Sign: convention, double quote marks, verbation quotes, single quote paragraphs, parenthesis, contextual data or field workers' interpretations, angle bracket, emic concept of the number, slash, etic concept of the researchers, solid line, beginning or ending of a segment. Reliability of interview data can be increased by training the interviewers and by checking interview guides in test interviews or after the first interview. In the case of an observation training before entering the field and regularly evaluating what has been observed can be promote the reliability of findings. In a nutshell, reliability is qualitative research demands that the data are presented in such a way that the reader can clearly differentiate the voice of the subject from the interpretations of the researcher. It is also demand that the procedures used by the researcher constantly be checked and tuned to so that the data obtained may be considered dependable. Reflections and Actions 2.26.1. Suppose a fellow learner of MSO 002 at your study center wants to study the status of education in a state and draw conclusion after reviewing a school function. Moreover, sure he would find willingness to talk. What would you advise her for making the data reliable as an indicator of what is going to in the education? Write your answers in 300 words. That is your action. Okay. After completing the reflections and action 26.1, let us move on to the criterion of validity. Validity, as mentioned earlier, refers to the truth value. In the context of qualitative research, validity refers to the extent to which the data reflects the thoughts, views, actions, and experiences of subjects in an accurate manner. 26.5 Procedural Validity. Validity refers to the accuracy of the data generated by the research instrument, whether it is an interview or questionnaire or some other means of research. If we ask the questions, have the methods that use color that result of my research, were there other factors that came in the way? Answers to such questions refer to the internal validity of a research. Validity of a research also about answering the questions: how valid is one's conception of the situations, how generalizations are one's result. Answers to the questions refers to the external validity of your research. Face validity means statistical measures of validity. For example, type 1 error will require rejections of the hypothesis when it is true. Type 2 error will require acceptance of hypothesis when it is false. A qualitative research is more likely to be valid than quantitative research as long as there is an adequate sampling and precision of observations and subtle changes in environment and people are observed carefully. It is not difficult to establish the validity of one's data collection method. You can safely say that the concept of validity refers to the extent to which your data provide a true measurements of social reality. Take an example of shortage of power supply. You may be quite sure of this statistics about power shortage week by week. You also have to be sure how valid or accurate a picture of power shortage in the whole town of the state you statistics represent. If you were to compare your figures with those collected by government agency, its figures may be reliable, but the government's definition of power shortage may not be the same as used in your research. In this is the case when then the two sets of statistics are not valid for the purpose of comparison, because the comparison is not between two things alike and therefore not valid. How do we achieve validity in our research? Let us look at procedural validity. Guidelines to procedural validity. To bring about a validity in the research process, Walk has suggested the following guidelines. Refrain from talking. When you are in the field, listen as much as possible. Produce field notes that are as exactly as possible. Begin to write yearly so that you will not forget the little details that separate good research from the ordinary. Write in such a way that your readers can see themselves the points you are trying to bring out. In other words, provide enough data to enable readers to draw out their own inference and follow the ones you are making. Your report should be as complete as possible. It should be as candid as possible. Seek feedbacks of your findings and presentation from your colleagues. Your presentation should be characterized by a balance between the various aspects you have studied rather than leaning too heavily on one or other aspect. Your presentation should display accuracy in writing. How can you use field research as a means of checking the validity of your research? For answering this question, go to the next section. 26.6 Field research as a validity check. The very nature of fieldwork is its flexibility and openness, which will enable you to study your data in a variety of ways. In a field situations, routine contact with people on day-to-day basis over an extended period of time will help you to test your emerging hypothesis. This method is very sensitive to discrepancies between meanings presumed by investigations and those understood by the target population. The field is a zone controlled by those investigated rather than the investigator. The researcher is at the mercy of his subjects and not vice versa, as in a controlled experiment. The more disciplined your engagement with the field and the greater your receptivity to the different, sometimes contradictory input you to receive, the greater are the chances of your data having validity. The process of communicative validation process involves taking the subjects or actors into a confidence and involving them in the research process so that you are able to ensure that what you have understood is actually what they meant. By showing your interviews, the transcriptions of your first interview with them, you can ask them to judge whether you have accurately reported what they said or felt. The danger is, of course, that they may later deny saying things which they may perceive as showing them in a bad light. Your ability as a researcher is then called into play. You have to separate the real response from the released one. 26.7 Method appropriate criteria. Are the criteria of reliability and validity adequate or appropriate to evaluate the qualitative data? A number of social scientists have opined that criteria, if applied alone, fail to understand the basic nature of qualitative research. They have attempted to evolve more in method appropriate criteria that enable a researcher to look critically at his data. We shall briefly present the formulation of Lincoln and Guba, who have included in their scheme such a criteria as trustworthiness, credibility, dependability, transferability, and conformability. Let us discuss only the first two criteria, namely trustworthiness and credibility, as these two are most crucial in Lincoln and Guba's scheme, and they suggest the following measures to increase credibility. First, prolonged engagement and persistent observation. Prolonged engagement refers to the amount of time spent by the researchers in the field. It enables a researcher to learn about the culture of a social setting over an extended period of time and to build a relationship of trust and establish rapport with the respondents. If the investigators spend a very limited time in the field, then the distortions are likely to come. If research is being conducted in a residential school setting, the field worker will find the month before the summer break a very typical one, as students and the teachers are under tremendous pressures due to examinations, evaluations, and declaration of result. By observing such things in 1 month in the life of the school, the researchers would get a very distorted picture. However, if he does not observe the activities this month, then he would not understand the totality of this social setting. Other distortions include those brought in by the researcher's own bias. Example, he or she may only listen to the views of those teachers whose views match her or his own worldview. Some respondents may deliberately want to please the investigator or even to confuse or deceive her or him. Prolonged engagement helps the researchers to sift fact from fiction. See box 26.2 on persistent observation. Box 26.2 Persistent observation. Persistent observation refers to the detailed observations that provide depth to research, helping to sort out relevancies from irrelevancies. Persistent observations involves looking out for any odd incidents or atypical behavior that may shed light on the problem. To continue the example of the school, as a researcher may observe behavior patterns of the children in the residential school and draw hypothesis that the children who have spent a long time in the school display greater levels of confidence and independence. However, while accompanying the students on a school trip to another town, the researcher observes that one of the old students who had judged a confident and independent clings to the hands of the teacher. This rather atypical response may lead to a sensitive researchers to explore the possibility that the confidence and independence of these children is displayed in familiar settings of their school, and outside that familiar setting, they are as vulnerable as any other child who may have joined school very recently. As a further measure, Lincoln and Guba recommended triangulation of different methods, researchers, and data. See section 26.8. Peer debriefing. This refers to regular meeting with the other people who are not involved in the research in order to discuss finding, hypotheses, and results and gain their insight as well. It is important that the debriefer should be a peer and not an authority figure, example a professor or one's department. In order to prevent views being imposed, friends and colleagues are ideal debriefers. The researcher studying the residential school may have a debriefer of a friend who also is a parent of a school-going child. The debriefer would then be able to understand the challenges and contribute to the findings of the researcher by introducing a parent's perspective. Third, member checking. According to Lincoln and Guba, this technique is the most important in establishing credibility. It refers to the process by which the members of a stakeholding groups are allowed to test the categories, interpretations, and conclusions. They thus have a chance to recognize whether the investigator has imposed his constructions upon them or whether their views have been adequately expressed. Member checking is basically a communicative validations referred to be in the previous section of validity. Fourth, maintaining a reflexive journal. According to Lincoln and Kuban, a reflexive journal is a kind of diary in which the investigator records information about her or herself on a regular basis. It's provide information about the researcher's schedule, methods, and insights, and provide a valuable guide to understanding the direction to which the research process takes. Fifth, analysis of negative cases and the sensitivity of analytic induction. Analytic induction refers to the process by which a hypothesis formulated to understand a phenomena is applied to a specific case. If it does not fit the case, then it is reformulated and applied again. Each individual negative case helps to further refine the hypothesis. Further cases are studied until the stage arrives when a universal relationship is established. Hence, each negative case calls for redefinition or reformulation of the problem, thereby create credibility. To check the dependability of the research, the concept of auditing is used based on the procedures of audit in the field of finance. Briefly, the auditing trial that has to be checked includes the raw data, their collection and recording, data reduction, that is summaries, short descriptions of cases, memos, etc., the reconstruction of data into themes, definition and relationship, and the finding inferred from them, process notes and decision regarding methods, personal notes about one's intentions, one's ideas about research and expectations of the participant, and the pilot study and preliminary plans of the research. The auditing trial helps to account for the manner in which the research was conducted and its outcome. As said previously, qualitative research includes the subjectivity of the researcher, and yet it is ultimately judged in terms of its objectivity, that is the ability to bring the forefront the lives of experience of relationship of people. Unlike other scientists, qualitative researchers do not report to any studied objects. Rather, they report on their interactions with the objects they study, namely cultures. This is why objectivity is difficult and yet essential, according to Kirk and Miller. In this context, the views of Harvey Sachs may be cited. Sachs describes that serious work include paying attention to details, and if something matters, it should be observable. For Sachs, observation study means observing the activities that members of a society did rather than speculating about their motives and inner thoughts. We will now look at the use of multiple methods in sociology. It is also referred as triangulation or methodological pluralism, but we will go to this topic of triangulation after completing reflections and action 26.2. Reflections and action 26.2. Take an example of your friend studying the problem of unemployment in your state. She collects the unemployment statistics from the employment exchange. We may take the statistics to be quite reliable, recorded year by year. She considers her sample of figures pertaining to one decade to perceive the trend. But you find that in a period of one decade, there were several changes in definitions of what constitutes unemployment. In such a situation, what sort of problems do you find in her research method, write a note to help your friend to see the problem with her research and suggest how she can get, in terms of research method, a more accurate picture of unemployment in your state. 26.8 Triangulation. You would have by now realized that various methods of gathering data have different advantages and disadvantages. Apparently, as a researcher, you would like to use methods with more advantages and then disadvantages. You would also like to avoid a weakness in one method and to use a second method which is strong in sphere in which the first is weak. Take the example of interview method. Take the example of an interview method. You can say that the interview method has a weakness in the sense that we are not always sure that the interview is telling the truth. In order to avoid this weakness of the interview method, you may decide to cross-check the information you have gathered by using the method of observing the everyday life of that interview to find out what the person actually does and what she or he tells. The use of multiple methods of accessing the validity of your research data may be more specifically called between methods or cross-method triangulation. In this fashion, you are able to combine the different methods and obtain a better picture of the subject of your research. Generally, surveyors use the technique of triangulation in their work. The theory behind the concept of triangulation is quite simple. The aim of triangulation is to obtain accuracy in a measurement between 2 points from which you require a way of measuring that is reliable. You can obtain reliability by replication, but repeating the same procedure does not ensure complete reliability. Here the mathematics helps us. If we can take 3 different measurements between 3 points, we can ensure that the measurement of the distance between point A and point B is absolutely correct by using a mathematical principle that each angle of an equilateral triangle is equal to 60 degree. So we just triangulate our measurement by taking 3 different measurements. The theory of triangulation provides us in social research some degree of control over the accuracy of the data we gather. There are 2 types of triangulation, namely methodological triangulation and theoretical triangulation. Methodological triangulation refer to the way we use different methods in the research process. Theoretical triangulation is the way we use various theoretical perspectives in our research. Let us briefly discuss each one of them. Methodological triangulation. In doing so, a practical introduction, Harvey and McDonald describe the following 3 types of methodological triangulation. One researcher uses 2 or more research techniques. 2 or more researchers use the same research technique. 2 or more researchers use 2 or more research techniques. You may use methodological triangulation for the following purpose: to gather different types of information, for example, qualitative and quantitative. 2 or more researchers using the same method and compare their result to find out if they agree that they have similar findings. To check what that material collected in one form is both reliable and valid. Theoretical triangulation. This form of triangulation is not popular among sociologists. It is of course possible to study a social group from the theoretical perspectives of a structuralist and interactionalist. The structuralist perspective would require you to look at the institutional relationships that exist in a social group. For an example, the family. From an interactionalist perspective, you would like to look at family life from the point of view of individuals, members of different families or of particular family groups. Generally, sociologists working from the point of one perspective would not be inclined to look at the subject of their researches from another theoretical perspective. This is why we find that theoretical triangulation is quite uncommon. Clearly, by using multiple methods or more than one method, you can enjoy the benefit of each method and the different types of data they generate. For example, both statistical and oral counts. The advantage of one method helps to overcome the limitations of other method. Let us now examine some of the key ethical considerations that a qualitative researcher must keep in mind before going to the next section, complete reflection and action 2.26.3. Reflections and action 26.3. Consider if it is feasible always to combine various methods in one research. States what kind of problems you are likely to face as a researcher when you attempt to combine qualitative and quantitative methods. 26.9. Ethical consideration of qualitative research. Fieldwork is one of the key methodological tools employed in qualitative research. Fieldwork raises some quite ethical issues because of the researcher is participating in the lives of the people under study. It often becomes difficult to draw the line between the researcher's role as a participant and as an observer. Some social scientists believe that the researcher should make it clear to her or his subjects what he or she is doing, and under no circumstances should the subject withhold her or his true intentions. In other words, should make it clear that she is conducting a research inquiry. However, in reality, this is easier said than done. Suppose a researcher is attending a wedding in a community, and she or he is studying. This is an excellent opportunity to interact with the several members of the community and elicit information. If the researcher announces her intentions on such an occasion, she is likely to alienate members or cause a lot of discomfort to them. Schills tries to draw a distinction between the observations of the everyday life and the observations of field research. The former refers to the observations that result from the social relationship that arise out of the intentions other than observation. The observer has not created the relationship merely for the purpose of doing research. What happens, however, when observation from daily life where there is no intentions of doing research later acquire significance for research? Kidder and Jude cite the instance of a researcher working as a volunteer with rape victims in a hospital emergency ward. Her work as a volunteer helped her gain insight in the victims' methods of coping that appeared to contradict the current psychological theories of coping and taking control. Could she or use her findings? The women she had talked to had not been informed that she was doing research because at that time she was working with them. She was not in fact conducting research but doing voluntary work. See box 26.3 for another example. Another example quoted by Kidder and Jude pertains to a white American woman researcher who participated extensively in the lives of black women. She studied in an economically poor neighborhood. Since the researcher had a car, she was often asked to run errands by the black women. Example, taking sick children to the clinic, collecting provisions, laundry, etc. She also developed a genuine friendship with the many women there. Did her friendships and the help she gave these women make her observation more ethically correct or less so? It takes a great deal of maturity on the part of the investigator to avoid misusing information gathered and not treating all kinds of sensitive and personal information as data. Erlandson et al. Identify the following ethical considerations that a researcher must bear in mind. First, protecting the subject from physical or psychological harm. Second, protecting the subject's privacy and confidentiality. Third, protecting the subject against unjustifiable deception. And fourth, acquiring the informed consent of the subject. The above points are interrelated. For example, in order to protect the subject from the physical and psychological harm, the researcher must also protect his privacy and not deceive him. Erlandson et al. Did a quote example of a researcher studying a prison system. Because some staff and the inmates were in highly sensitive situations, revealing their intents would seriously harm their personal safety and career. The same applies to the research pertaining to homosexual sex workers, etc., who are stigmatized in our society. These researchers should take into account of the potential risk of the participant face if they are identified. The present researcher decided to use pseudonyms and omitted information that was potentially damaging. He also made the decisions not to disguise his own role or the reason why he was in the organization. The issue of deception or concealing one's identity is a very tricky one. It is argued that sometimes the researchers can gain access to society's dark side by gaining entry into it and becoming one of the group. One reads the journalistic corpse in which the writer pretend to be the prisoners and live in a prison in order to gain the inside information, or pretended to be potential clients of a sex workers or massage parlors operating as a sex shops in order to write about their sensational exposes. However, serious social science is not journalism. Erlandson et al. Opine that deception is subversive to the research effort and counterproductive to the research for multiple social constructions that individuals hold. To obtain an informed consent of the participant, the researcher must explain to them clearly the goals or his research and allay their natural fears. Suppose a researcher is studying interreligious marriages and is trying to obtain the consent of couple that have had such marriages. Some of the natural fears the potential participant might have could include the following. Is the researcher working on behalf of some politico-religious organization that wishes to identify and expose them? Will their privacy be guarded? Will their families be subject to social harassment or censure? Will the parents have social embracement or ensure? Will the parents have problems in arranging the marriage of a younger sister or brother if he is known that the older sister married to another religious against her parents' wishes? By discussing these issues frankly and clarifying the strategies by which their privacy and confidentiality can be protected, the research may be able to obtain their informed consent and thus accord to them due respect and safeguard their dignity and human rights. In order to further appreciate the point of ethical concern of ethnographers, complete reflection and action 26.4. Bitley opted to identify himself with the resident Brahmins of the village where he carried out his field research in Tamil Nadu. He had access to their homes and temples. When his Harijan informants came to visit him, their Brahmin neighbors and also his host objected, and Bitley then changed the mode of his contact with them. In this example, you may be able to find the evidence of the problem of conforming to the value system of the people one is studying. Find at least 2 or more examples of respect for the interest of the citizens one is studying. You would be able to find examples in Bentley and Madden in 1975. 26.1010 Conclusion. The issues of validity and reliability are problematic ones in qualitative research precisely because the qualitative methods demand a lot of personal engagement from the researcher. The risk of the researcher going native, that is identifying herself or himself so completely with the people under study, that's then becomes a spokesperson for their issues and interest is also significant. The researcher must at one and the same time be both a participant and an observer doing research and yet interacting with the subjects in their own territory on their own terms. Several techniques have been identified by which the researcher keeps a scrupulous and detailed record of the work done, separating the views of the actor from one's own. These include the techniques of triangulation. Interwoven with this methodological consideration is the moral imperative that the need to recognize and respect the fact that the subjects of research are human beings. Research are human beings who must be treated with respect and accorded the dignity that every human being deserves. Further reading. Foster J. 2003 Qualitative Research Sociology Review. Hobson, Multiple Methods of Social Research, Sociology Review. M. Shaw and R. Widowfield, Ethics and Doing Health Research, Sociology Review. So this is the end of the Unit 26. Thank you very much.